All right, so yes, we can get started and hopefully people can join us as they may. So good evening. This is my first evening as chair of the Community Preservation Committee. This meeting is being held virtually and is being recorded in accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and the order of mayor. Do I now say Ballantyne or should I continue to say Curatone because it was his order?
I don't know.
Former mayor, maybe.
Of the former and the current mayor, perhaps, I don't know. And just a special greeting to everyone in the new year, our new year of the CPC and a new round of funding and applications. Roberta, our administrator, has prepared a full agenda for us tonight and actually for all of our meetings going forward. And I also want to welcome Rose White as the co-chair and thank Laura Boreski again for her work as chair this past year. So with that, I will hand it over to Roberta to take over the meeting.
All right. So we have with us, so first on the agenda is approval of minutes from November and December. I don't know if you want to take that now or if you prefer to hold that to the end.
I'd like to take that now and just get that business completed.
All right.
So I guess first, if there is anyone from the public here tonight, I don't think there is. We often reserve the beginning of the meeting for public comments just so that you can make your comments and be first on the agenda. Is there anyone from the public here this evening?
We don't have anyone in the attendees.
Okay. So approval of the November 17th meetings. This was the meeting where there was a glitch and people didn't get the materials in advance, so we decided to review the meetings later. So does anyone have any comments on the November 17th meeting minutes? I personally do not.
I didn't either.
Can I have a motion to approve? Oh, Alan?
I don't have any comments on them.
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the meeting, the minutes, the November 17th minutes?
I can move that.
I'll second it.
Okay, great. No, the December 15th meeting minutes, last month's meeting minutes. I had one very minor typo on agenda item 7, last paragraph, talking about the calendar. There was it says the dame time instead of same time, just an S for a D, and that was the only thing I picked up content-wise. I had no comments. Does anyone else have comments on the December 15th?
I don't know how important it is, but I believe I was present at that meeting, but I'm not listed as present on the minutes.
Thank you. I'll reflect that.
And I think the same could be said for David, actually.
Right? Okay. Sorry for the omission.
Thanks for noticing.
Any other errors or omissions or corrections to the December 15th meeting minutes? Okay, does anyone want to move to accept the minutes?
Sure, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, great. So with that, we will move on to the Affordable Housing Trust, who Paul is here this evening to meet with us.
Sorry, you need to vote.
Oh,
That's
I'm sorry.
all right.
Minor
No,
point.
thanks.
Shall I vote by roll call?
Yeah, vote by roll
Yes.
call. And I think
Okay.
if we didn't vote for the first one, you can vote for both in
I
one
think
roll
we will
call.
vote right now for both minutes.
Yeah.
And I will start with Jahan.
Yes.
Alan Bingham,
Yes. Yes.
David Turin,
Yes.
Rose White,
Yes.
Laura Beretsky,
Yes.
Rebecca McKevitz.
Yes.
I believe I have everyone. That's everyone I see on my screen.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Minutes
Okay,
are
so
approved.
with that, it's approved unanimously. Back to welcoming Paul. Paul is here on our invitation to talk with us, have a little Q&A about the Affordable Housing Trust, and I will hand it over to you, Paul, to take it from there.
Sure. So I think also Mike Filoni, the housing director, is going to be joining at some point this evening when he has a chance. But I'm Paul Goldstein. I think I've seen a few of you before when I was at the CPC in the spring to present on the Affordable Housing Trust at the public committee meeting, I think that was. But anyway, I'm the housing programs coordinator in the housing division at OSPCD. I'm the main staff liaison to the Affordable Housing Trust. So authoring the biannual report to the CPC is part of my duties, as well as helping to administer the various funding that's dispersed by the trust for CPA awards and grants and projects. Roberta had provided questions that she had and also provided questions that she received from you folks, which I've sort of itemized and answered to the best of my ability. I'm happy to run through that question by question, or if people want to ask directly their questions, we can do it that way too. I'm open to whatever procedure works best.
I am open to the idea of running through them question by question.
Sure. That's fine. If I'm going too fast or if you have an additional question, please give me a shout. So I guess I'll start with some of the questions from Roberta and leading up to when I was originally scheduled to get the December meeting, I believe. The first is the process with our strategic visioning consultant. So we're in the process of finishing the document that will be the basis for selecting a consultant to carry out that process. Items in the scope of work include meeting with current and past grant recipients on the impact of funding received, meeting with trustees, city staff, members of the CPC to solicit feedback and submitting an updated version of the trust guidelines ultimately when that strategic visioning undertaking is complete. And so I hope to have more of a concrete update on that as time marches on. But the first step is to get a consultant on board, and we're pretty close to finalizing that document for public consumption. Any questions on that, or? Okay, great. I'm unfortunately working on one screen tonight, so I have my Word document up in front of everyone's face. So if I raise your hand and I don't see you, I apologize in advance. The second question, how can the Somerville Affordable Housing Trust coordinate with the CPC to evaluate community needs and housing goals? I believe this question can best be answered by the feedback provided by stakeholders such as the CPC, which is going to be solicited again during the upcoming strategic visioning process. The strategic visioning plan will note goals of the trust as determined by the community needs identified through conversations with stakeholders such as the CPC and other grant recipients. Questions? No?
I've got a question.
Yep.
Just so there's no, I don't know if this is to run through your questions. I would love to know if you're getting feedback from others as to.
I
how the funding is going, but we can wait. Maybe we should do that. Let you run through the questions and then we'll save our questions for the end.
Yeah, I think that's fine, and that is one of the other questions further down the road that was given to me ahead of the meeting. So thank you for noting that. With that being said, the next question from Roberta on behalf of the CPC was, how does the application and selection process work? So trust staff, which is me, draft requests for proposals for a variety of CPA funded housing assistance programs. In addition to a standard program and development application, RFP applications are also created for specific types of housing assistance programs, including rental assistance, tenancy stabilization, and leasing differential. Once the proposals are received, I create a summary and share with trustees via email, who then deliberate and vote on the proposals at the next monthly meeting. The applications are evaluated on several areas of criteria, such as the impact of the program, the agency capacity to carry out such a program, and that the program conforms to all requirements put forth by the Department of Revenue regarding the use of CPA funds, as well as the requirements of the City of Somerville and the Trust for the administration of trust housing programs. I'm happy to provide examples of past RFP applications for further reference upon request if anybody wants to take a look at those. To continue, how is the trust doing in terms of getting CPA funding out the door and expended? So I'm going to throw a couple of numbers out here. The trust has received a total of $10,102,730 in CPA appropriations since fiscal year 2015. When the $6 million bond proceeds for the 100 Homes program is included, that total comes to $16,102,730. To date, the total amount of CPA funds expended comes to $13,377,769.99. So that total is actually not inclusive of the $1,634,227.35 of committed but yet to be drawn down CPA funds that are still available to award recipients. When you factor that in, the total amount of CPA funds to be extended will come close, just over 15 million, or roughly 93% of all allocated CPA funding to the trust. And that's all to say that it's going pretty well getting all these funds out the door to providers. I don't know if those are questions from Roberta to me. The next are more questions from committee members. I can keep going through those, or if you want to pause for initial questions, we can do that as well. It's up to the panel. Hi, Mike.
I think it would be helpful to run through all of them, and then that way, you know, if you're going to answer something later on, we sort of have the big picture. Yeah.
Thanks.
If I could, before we go to the other questions, if I could just reintroduce myself, since it's been a couple of meetings since I presented on Paul's behalf in the fall in our biannual update reporting. I'm Mike Filoni from the city's housing division, and I serve on the Affordable Housing Trust by virtue of my position. So sorry to be a bit late tonight. I was just gonna also offer, if it would be of help, since, you know, especially on that last point where Paul was quoting some different numbers, if it would be useful for us to get this information to Roberta, just sort of for record or later referral, we'd be glad to provide that if that would be of use.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So I guess I'll continue. And these are questions that Roberta forwarded to me from committee members, and I answered them just down the line to the best of my ability, like I mentioned. So the first question would be, overall, do you feel that the Somerville Affordable Housing Trust Fund program is working well? My answer is that yes, I believe the trust has been instrumental in creating and sustaining affordable housing in Somerville. As I just mentioned, the trust is on track to spend down just over $15 million in CPA funding alone over about a 6-year period, and that has gone to the creation or support of affordable units in the city. And the non-CPA trust account has about just over $6 million available for new commitments, and that amount is only expected to grow as more linkage payments and fractional payments are made to the trust over the next few years.
Sorry, Paul, will you just say that number again? What's the linkage number or non-trust money? That's
So the non-CPA branch of the account available for new commitments, and it's not been committed yet, is just over $6 million currently. And I don't have the exact, I'm actually working on some revenue projections for the trust for the next meeting, but I could say pretty confidently that number is only going to continue to grow over the next few years as more projects come online. And for those who aren't familiar, what a linkage payment is, it's when a new commercial development occurs in the city, they have to pay what's called a project mitigation fee based on the square footage of the development being built, and that goes to the Affordable Housing Trust. And those payments are significant. Assembly Square, I would say, is the best example of that. The revenue generation from that development has been well into the millions. So, did that answer your question? Great, thank you. Next question was, are there things that the CPC could do to better support the Somerville Affordable Housing Trust and its efforts? And to that, I would say that the CPC has given immense support to the Housing Trust, most notably by way of designating the trust to administer the affordable housing portion of CPA funds. The 50% allocation of total CPA funds for housing in Somerville is one of the highest, if not the absolute highest, percentages of funds reserved for housing among municipalities which have adopted CPA. That funding has been a game changer for the trust and its ability to support and create affordable housing in Somerville, and continued availability of that funding is without question the most important thing the CPC can do to support the trust and its efforts.
If I could just add 2 more points to that. The first is Paul's absolutely right that it is among the highest percentages of funds going to housing of trust that I'm aware of. I worked in Cambridge, Boston, among other places, and I did make the in the view of one past and now former member of the CPC, I did have the unmitigated gall to mention in a prior presentation that the city of Cambridge does allocate more, around 70 to 75%. Last time I was working in that city anyway, I was quickly told that that's not comparable to Somerville. Points well taken insofar as Kendall Square had driven a lot of that revenue, and at one point in time, for whatever reason, it was a higher percentage. So while it's not quite the most, certainly among the highest. And the only other point I'd mention in terms of ways that the CPC could support the trust, Paul, I think this is a chance for us to mention that there is a home rule petition that the city council has passed that would enable the trust to once again fund some programs that, for fairly technical reasons involving the way the State Department of Revenue that ultimately oversees CPC funding has interpreted its rules, we can only support programs that ultimately sort of tie affordability to a specific unit. That means some more general housing support, programs, landlord mediation, for example, that don't in and of themselves create affordability. Haven't been able to be funded. We may be in a position of asking for a support letter for that home rule petition as it makes its way through the state legislature. So that would be one concrete opportunity to garner support if the CPC would be amenable to that. We can let Roberta know as that progresses.
Yes, please do share that information, or what your intention is with us, because we can reflect that in our annual plan update. which I think would help to document what it is that Somerville wants to do. If the CPC is amenable to making that one of its goals that it shares with you as well.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of new to this. Can you explain again what that home rule petition would be and what the difference is? What isn't fundable and would be after that?
Sure. Up until the last roughly 5 years or so, the Affordable Housing Trust, along with funding specific sort of hard development projects, also has supported various affordable housing programs, some that have received CPA funding and can continue to, are tenant assistance programs that make up the difference between what a tenant can pay for a specific unit under certain circumstances and what the rent is. So that would be an eligible program. In recent years, the Department of Revenue has begun to provide individual so-called private rulings in some municipalities where there have been sort of more general, broad-based housing support programs, like one, I use the example of a tenant landlord mediation program that can help resolve conflicts rather, that might enable a tenancy that otherwise might be terminated to continue, but they're not in and of themselves providing specific dollars to make a specific unit affordable. The Department of Revenue has ruled that under the current trust ordinance at the state level that exists and is in place in Somerville, those kinds of programs can't receive trust dollars to support. And so we have submitted a home rule petition. I should say the city council has passed and submitted a home rule petition that would broaden our flexibility to reinstate that kind of support, which we did for a number of years up until, as I said, 5 years or so ago. So that's sort of the goal, to get back some of that flexibility.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that for Mike and Paul? Is that do we do this, and are there other communities that do that specific, use funds for that specific use, or would we be carving is this a new path forward? And are there other city funds that could be used for this if CPC funds can't be?
I can start offering some information on that, and feel free to jump in, Paul. I should also note that, I am aware that Roberta brings a significant amount of experience and expertise to this field. So not sure if this is among the areas that you've encountered elsewhere, Roberta, but please jump in. My understanding, again, I haven't read the City of Cambridge's trust ordinance, but I believe that they operate under their own ordinance and not the Massachusetts state housing trust legislation. Roberta, do you happen to know if that's the case?
I believe that Somerville, likewise, your trust ordinance predates the state's template.
It was
However,
reformed though.
Right.
Using CPA funds, the CPA funds that does not, you can't supersede the CPA rules. So if your funding is primarily coming from CPA, then you are bound by the CPA rules to use those funds.
Right. But you're absolutely right that originally Somerville operated under its own ordinance. For reasons, it's timely that Alan Anicio has joined us now, and that around 2005, the city's treasurer and the CP and the Affordable Housing Trust determined that for specific reasons, the city should adopt the Massachusetts state trust legislation. So in any event, I believe Cambridge is one example that still operates under its own rules, so to speak, and provides this kind of support. There are other city programs. That's something that's been evolving in recent years since the creation of since establishment of the city's Office of Housing Stability. That Alan's also very involved with in terms of its funding sources, but they do provide some tenant-based tenant assistance as well.
I have seen communities that have, the CPA and the CDBG funds are different streams, and they can fund some of the support through CDBG funds. And then in some cases, partner CPA funds where it can specifically, for example, in Medford, there's CDBG funded legal support program, which they can use CPA funds to pay rent arrears matched with the legal support. So, it's just kind of using the razor's edge to chisel in where we can use these funds to meet those needs.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, Mike and Roberta, Mike can correct me if I'm misspeaking, but for the home rule petition would really affect the non-CPA funding source, because as Roberta mentioned, the CPA funds are tied to the specific DOR statute that governs how they have to be dispersed. So.
Oh, that's good to understand.
Yeah.
You're not looking to change what you can do with CPA. You're looking to change what you can do with the non-CPA trust funds.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry if that wasn't clear from the get-go. Any other questions or that, or should I keep moving down my list here? Okay. So the next question I received from the committee was, does the Somerville Affordable Housing Trust get feedback from applicants on a regular basis, and what are some of the thoughts and suggestions? So once again, I should mention that the feedback from past and current grant recipients will be part of the trust's forthcoming strategic visioning undertaking. That's a big part of assessing how the program's going and how the funding is going and how providers are doing with those awards. So having said that, my time with the city, I don't consider myself new at this point. I've been here almost a year. But in the grand scheme of things, that hasn't been that long a time. But the most direct feedback that I've received from providers is when the additional funding will be available and where they can check to find that information. And so to address that, I want to make sure that the next RFP notices are broadcast as widely as possible. And Roberta had provided some helpful suggestions to make our website a little more user-friendly. And so that's something I definitely going to look towards doing when the new RFPs are ready to be made public.
And if I can jump in, I think, Roberta's has been doing some work on our communications end. I think we had to clear this with the communications team, but I think there's a Facebook page now and a couple other things. So, we can jointly market or advertise those efforts as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, the goal is to get it out, the word out as broadly as possible. So thanks, Alan. That's helpful.
When do you anticipate that'll go out?
So that goes back to the RFP question, I guess. And I think I mentioned to you, Roberta, in passing, but when assessing the need to issue RFPs in the fall with housing division staff, we came to the conclusion that there's already a significant amount of unspent funding available to providers, mostly from the recently executed FY21 contracts. So we felt it was important for providers to spend down that amount of money before applying for another funding cycle. So we came to the conclusion and brought to the trust that for the forthcoming RFPs, we'll limit those to applicants who either did not apply for the last funding cycle or have already expended their FY21 award. And my goal is to have those ready for the trust to hopefully deliberate on by the March meeting and then put out shortly thereafter. So that's sort of the timeline on that right now. And if that changes, I'll certainly be in touch. But that's the plan for the time being.
Great.
The next question what are applicants' biggest hurdles to creating and preserving access to affordable housing for Somerville residents? So I think that this question would best be answered by providers themselves. And again, during the strategic visioning process, that's certainly something we'll be approaching providers about to get their opinion on that and feedback to that question. But, the one thing I can say though, just from being on the job for almost a year, is that there's no shortage of clients who are in need of these housing assistance programs. If there's anything that's been an across the board challenge, I think, for providers, which again, I'm hesitant to speak directly for them, but it's been a challenge to accommodate such a large demand for the types of programs that are funded by these CPA awards. That seems to be the case with the rental assistance program, tenancy stabilization. There's no shortage of demand for those funds and those programs.
And to the extent that the question may have also been getting at challenges on the development side as well as on the programmatic or tenant support side, I would say the biggest single challenge is also one of the hardest to solve, in that, as folks know, the city is about 4 square miles. It's either the most dense in New England or the most dense, and there's a tremendous demand and competition for available sites. So one recent development that provides some hope on that front is an affordable housing overlay zoning ordinance that the city council did in the last year that could hopefully yield somewhat of a competitive advantage or position nonprofit developers who are interested in doing full 100% affordable development projects to compete for the very high land costs and site acquisition costs that are just sort of a structural challenge.
Thanks, Mike. Anything else, or I can jump to the final question I had prepared an answer for. Great. So that final question is, how do you, which the trust, plan to compete with affordable housing against developers who are building luxury condos and seem to be buying up every opportunity? And that's a great question, and that's fairly open-ended. I would say one thing I would point out is that the 100 Homes program, which I believe most of you are familiar with, that's been significantly funded by CPA grants and is administered by Somerville Community Corporation. That program aims to specifically purchase properties which would otherwise be purchased by developers who would want to flip it at a market rate. And so the more success that program has, that's more properties that don't fall into the hands of developers who would not produce the amount of affordable housing otherwise if SCC didn't step in and purchase those properties. The other thing I would say is that it's kind of a blanket statement, but the trust is open to hearing proposals from developers or nonprofits who wish to add, to the city's affordable housing stock. And for every property that comes online with an affordable restriction, that's one less property that can be bought or rented and sold at market rate by a product developer. And so the trust is open to pursuing as many of those opportunities as possible. And again, the 100 Homes program has certainly been a benchmark for that effort so far. And that's the last prepared question I had. So thanks for sending that in advance, and thanks for giving some time to prepare. And I guess at this point, questions I can answer to the best of my ability along with Mike, if anyone has some additional ones.
Hi. I would love to know, do you guys have a sense of how much the city contributes to the trust beyond the CPC funds annually?
I can pull up some numbers and share those at some point. I did prepare something. Actually, if you reference the report that was submitted in the fall, I believe there's some funding charts that shows the contributions to the trust, which are made up. The city doesn't fund the trust directly, but it like, you can correct me if I'm not explaining this right, but it designates certain fees, like linkage fees and fractional payments to go directly to the trust to administer for affordable housing. So I mentioned the linkage payments. Fractional payments is another significant source where if residential development comes online that falls under the city's inclusionary housing ordinance, they're obligated to provide a percentage of those units as affordable, and that percentage comes out to 7.2 units. They're obviously not going to build 0.2 of a unit. They're going to make a payment that's calculated based on available data to the trust instead of that fractional unit. The other main sources of funding are loan repayments, interest, stuff like that. Alan or Mike, if I missed anything, please jump in.
That captures it. Excuse me. That captures the three main sources well. The only point I would add or reiterate really is just that the real game changers for the trust that I think will make for an especially interesting strategic planning process is the trust is in a materially different place now than it was in about 2014, up until about 2014-15, when linkage payments really started to dramatically increase. And that happened to coincide with the first years that CPA started to flow. So that gets away from the question that was asked. But fractional payments are somewhat significant. Loan repayments are comparatively much smaller than both linkage and CPA. It's really those two sources together that put the trust in a much better place to make a difference than it was from its creation in 1990 up until about 2015.
Yeah, if I could jump in and just, I think Paul made a good distinction in explaining it in terms of the different revenue streams versus just what can be expected, because unlike CPA, which is a pretty consistent stream of income every year, because the city's tax base is going to vary very little from year over year. But where these are linked to development projects and loan repayments and other sort of like project-based fee schedules, it ebbs and flows. So, we've been fortunate in the last 3 or 4 years to be in a heavy development cycle. So there's been a lot of linkage fees coming in. And, when you're in a hot real estate market and there's a lot of sales, you get a lot of large lump sum loan repayments because people are just, selling their properties that have a lien on them. And so that's got to get cleared. But, if the economy turns and development slows down and, the real estate market dips, then, the trust could see a decline too in revenue. So it's not as consistent as the CPA income stream.
And you noticed that I threw on the screen the numbers that you're talking about. So let me know if you wanted to go back and see those again.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm noticing a renewed interest in luxury condo developers in places along the new Green Line corridor. This is evidenced in places like Allen Street, which is just east of Union Square, and also Ball Square in particular, which to date has been sort of a sleepy semi-storefront residential area. But these places seem to be the focus of interest in the developers. And these are the developers who build these luxury condos that try to build them so that they construct them so they come in just underneath the inclusionary number. Is there anything that are you looking at in the Affordable Housing Trust that could help that this development gets more guided towards affordable housing and less towards the luxury condos along this corridor?
I'll start, Mike, and I'll let you jump in. But my initial response is trust would be happy to be here. Any kind of proposals along that corridor would build affordable housing. You know, I don't want to speak out of turn or give bad information, but the trust isn't. The trusts are the ones hearing the proposals. I don't think they're actively going out and unless they issue an RFP for development. Mike, if I'm off the rails, let me know. But you know, typically developers and nonprofits approach the trust about projects they want to develop that will produce affordable housing. So, you know, as far as the trust being able to target or the specific area of the city, you know, I think that's contingent on, you know, people approaching the trust with those ideas. And Mike, if I'm
Right.
I can jump in, but
I think that the question was about what the trust is in position to do, and to put a finer in that regard, to put a finer point on Paul's comments. Unfortunately, it's not a lot insofar as the inclusionary. I am a bit surprised to hear that they are so small that the inclusionary ordinance doesn't apply, because that goes all the way down to 4 units at this point as of 2016 or 19. But it can still be a luxury, a so-called luxury development. And even if it has an inclusionary component, it is what it is. So the zoning ordinance, as you know, emanates from the city council. So that's really the purview of city legislators, as opposed to the trust itself.
Yeah, I think you mentioned like an affordable housing overlay. That would be something that would be coming from the city, that the city would have to propose and pass in order to protect neighborhoods or create special districts or something like that.
Yes, and in fact, they did. They did. It's sufficiently new so that I can't say we've realized sort of specific benefits of that. But to oversimplify a bit, the inclusionary, the affordable housing overlay district does basically provide a density bonus to enable proposers who would build 100% affordable housing on a given site to build more units. So in other words, that positions them to be able to compete in terms of the site acquisition cost to gain control of sites to build on. So there's a good deal of thought and consideration went into the drafting of that. I attended a couple of the committee meetings where there were affordable housing developers who said, yes, we've looked at this and we think could make a difference. So that's sufficiently new. So maybe there are some projects in the planning phase that haven't sort of reached our radar screen, but I'm holding out hope that that could have a material difference.
Would anyone else like to ask a question of Paul and Michael while they're with us tonight? I have a I'll ask
No,
my
go ahead,
question, and then
Heather.
we'll go to Rose. And this may just show my ignorance in terms of how you communicate with your constituents, where we are constantly trying to have a more robust outreach in terms of reaching a more diverse segments of Somerville, to make them aware of CPA projects and on all different levels, all different types, as well as to solicit their input in terms of how we're spending our funds, and just really to reach the populace of Somerville better. Is there a way in which you could help us to reach more people through communications or something like that?
I guess I'll start, Mike, and you can continue. But just to reiterate that, I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but the strategic visioning undertaking is really going to reach out to providers who are really the conduit to the people in the community who make use of these programs. And I think to get the feedback from the providers who are getting it from their program participants, I think helps to inform, you know, what the trust can do more of as far as administering those programs going forward. And, you know, I apologize that that's sort of a regurgitated answer, but that's really, I think, an important thing to drive down, is that this process is gonna, you know, hopefully reach out to more people in the community who are benefiting from these programs, and the feedback will be disseminated as such. Mike, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that.
I would add that meetings that Alan and I attend as division directors are the basis for comments along that same line that any number of divisions in the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development face, you know, whether it's public space, you know, and urban forestry or mobility. How do we just not reach the same constituents or the same population that may be, you know, more inclined toward accessing electronic communications? And I know that Alan has been more directly involved than me in the work of the executive director's office to have a position to support the work of the recently established Office of Racial and Social Justice. And there is one position in OSPCD dedicated to just how do you get the word out effectively, both to what could be considered hard to reach populations, and generally the other point I would mention that isn't responsive in terms of it, you know, being a way for us to get word out. But I know that on inclusionary housing opportunities, our staff in the housing division has really tried to work closely with what formerly was known as Summer Viva, now the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and their language capacity. And they do have some capacity now for translation, for instance, and interpretation to, you know, I think the extent to which we can cross-fertilize, you know, across market, you know, that really is a consistent concern and point of emphasis that I know Alan and I hear most weeks.
Okay, thank you. Rose?
Yeah, so just a last, hopefully quick questions. Just curious if you guys, when, if you do have to turn folks down who come in with applications for trust funds, so does that happen, and what happens? What do you do in that situation where folks are coming and looking for money and they and you're not able to fund them?
I can, you want me to start, Mike, or do you want to just jump right in?
Since I may have had more chance to encounter that than Paul, I can start. And I'd use a term from a recent call we had with colleagues in another city who, you know, were referring to the tenant selection and tenant screening process as an effort to screen people in rather than screen out applicants. And the trust goal is to fund and facilitate and support affordable housing. So I think largely because of additional sources of funding through most particularly CPA and linkage over the last, you know, roughly 7 years, the only cases I can think of where applications simply have not been funded is if it's pretty evident that there's not a capacity to implement a program, or if there's record of not being able to really get the money spent and spent appropriately. So it has been much less an instance of inadequate funds. Occasionally, there has also been an application where there's just not a fit between what the trust does and can fund and say a particular program. Other programs that Alan is most familiar with, occasionally I think have been able to, I'm thinking of public service resources or other CDBG sources, Alan. So, you know, if we can't sort of take them in our funding door, there is an effort to try to direct them to other sources to the extent that may be possible.
That's great. Thank you.
Great. Is there any other questions for Dave, for Michael and Paul? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much for attending tonight. It was really helpful and I think a
Thank
rich
you.
discussion. And
Before we say goodbye to Michael and Paul, I wanted to actually maybe invite them to stay while we move on to the next agenda item, which is to talk about the reviewing the template for the spring report from the Affordable Housing Trust.
mm-hmm.
So I've put this on the agenda this evening because back in the fall, when I introduced the template for the fall report, both the fall report and spring report were included in the same template, but it was the committee's request to have some more time to digest the spring report version before we made it official. So this is our chance. So I'll bring this up on the screen and just run through what's in the template, and then we can see if there are any comments or adjustments, changes that we want to make to this template. So can you see the template now on your screen?
Yes.
Right. So this is the fall and spring templates were set up so that they complement one another and are not duplicating the same report, not asking you to prepare the same report twice a year. So where the fall report focused on funding availability, how much funding you're getting from different sources, and how much funding is available for the coming funding round, the spring report is focused on what projects you've funded, and then kind of looking at what is the status update of all of the previous projects that were funded in previous funding rounds. So the first section, well, first there's the introduction, is just going to provide a brief recap of what was included in the fall report so that somebody coming to this for the first time understands that this is, that the fall report complements this report. And then and it also provides just a little bit more background so that someone can understand the context of this report. And then the first section is the current year projects. So fiscal year, whatever the current year is, and then would list all of the projects that you funded in that current year in one overview table. And then perhaps a pie chart can be shown showing how much of these are construction projects versus programs. And then there would be a section providing details showing the description and status of each of the projects that are listed in the overview table above. And then finally, listing and describing any applications that were received that were incomplete or weren't funded, explain why they weren't funded and what is the status of those projects. And then the next section would be updates on projects that were funded in previous fiscal years, including photos wherever appropriate. And so these could be broken into some broad categories. First of all, obviously the 100 Homes Initiative. And then if there are other significant initiatives outside of the 100 homes that are development projects, those could be listed out as well. I think the committee can correct me if I'm wrong, things that have already been completed by a few years could be dropped off the list here of project updates. those can be referred to in prior years' reports. So I don't think that we need to keep adding new projects, keep the list of completed projects running in the annual reports. And then we do the same for programs, listing general types of programs first, with a table showing what the programs are, what has been funded from 2015 to present, and then a description of each of the programs, what's ongoing and what are in the past, and kind of a review of how the programs worked or what were lessons learned in those programs. If there are any funds remaining, mention whether the funds are returned, how much the funds were and whether they've been returned. And then also COVID-19 related housing programs. And I think that this could be expanded to say ARPA related housing programs as well. I think that wasn't really clear at the time that I set up the template in the first place. And then a section, this is repeated from prior years templates, I believe, lessons learned, things that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has learned from the CPA projects that were funded or from administering CPA funds. And then any stories that highlights of stories that are worth mentioning. Likewise, there are some nice examples of stories, anecdotes about affordable housing success stories that are in previous annual reports. So those kinds of stories I think would be fun to carry over here as well. And then finally, any other Affordable Housing Trust Fund news. So examples would be you're working with a consultant to update your guide plan, your action plan. There may be some other, the legislative initiative that you mentioned earlier this evening could also, I think, fit under the Affordable Housing Trust news. So those would be examples of what you would want to include. Comments or suggestions from committee members?
I had a question, but I'll defer to the committee first.
Alan?
Alan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. Going back to the first page, Roberta, where you've
Yeah.
got the, if you could just scroll back. Yeah. Where you've got down total amount funded and CPA funds used, I think it might be useful to have in there another couple of columns to talk about the amount requested, so we can see the effectiveness of the funding.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that would be adding one more column. Or were there additional columns that you wanted to suggest?
Well, I was thinking about the total amount funded and also the CPA funds used, because they might ask for a certain amount of CPA funds and they might not get all of that. But then would they be able to make it up with the other funds that they get from other sources?
Okay. I wonder if that's getting too much into the detail, to the weeds. Maybe I can defer to to Mike and Paul to answer that question of whether it's possible or relevant to state whether you used funds from other sources to
Well,
cover
we're really interested in CPA funds, aren't we? We're the CPC.
Yeah.
I'll start, Mike, and you can obviously jump in. But you know, in terms of like development projects, you know, one feedback from trustees often is what other funding sources are you leveraging? So again, in my somewhat limited experience in this role, when development projects are presented to the trust for a request for funding, usually a pretty detailed summary and uses pro forma is provided as well, noting what other sources are being tapped. So, you know, in theory, that information should be pretty easy to provide. And it's also worth noting that, in some cases, the trust might come back with not the full amounts asked based on the other sources of funding being leveraged. So that could be helpful information as well, potentially. But, Mike, I'll allow you to weigh in if there's anything else you want to add.
No, this is a summary report, and I think that would be useful in a summary report. It would for me anyway. I'm an accountant, what would I know?
Roberta, I had a question about the COVID-19 housing programs. I mean, you mentioned ARPA, and again, Alan and Mike can jump in if I'm incorrect here, but the trust is a beneficiary of ARPA funds. Essentially, it's really just the CPA allocation, as we mentioned, the linkage and fractional payments, which aren't tied to any sort of policy related to COVID-19. So I'm not really sure what we would include there, and maybe I'm not phrasing that question correctly, but I don't really think we'd have anything to put down there specifically related to COVID-19.
That may be the case. I know a lot of communities used CPA funds for emergency rental assistance programs. I don't know if Somerville did the same.
So those programs exist and have existed in the past, and I believe I'm pretty concrete in saying that they were, the last cycle of awards were administered the same way as they were, pre-COVID. I don't think there was any sort of restrictions or changes to the eligibility based on COVID. I had to review the scope of services and things like that nature. Mike, do you have any insight on that, or am I fairly correct when I say that?
There were some funds that were made available during the earlier months in the pandemic, and to be honest, a lot of that effort is a bit of a blur to me without going back to see what the actual sources were. Alan was even more immersed in that effort in terms of other, CARE Act funds and so forth. That
ESG too, I think.
So we can certainly, we should go back to make sure that there weren't additional monies that preceded Paul's time with the city.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. The prior administration dedicated a large portion of the CARES Act money that, was discretionary, that went to the nonprofits, et cetera. Sorry. The prior administration dedicated a lot of what we got in CARES and CDBG and ESG CV funds for rental assistance. There's also some additional other non-CDBG and ESG CARES funding that went to rental assistance, and I believe there may still be some ARPA programs that are getting tossed around that might address rental assistance. So, we were fortunate to have a generous allocation from those sources, and so it wasn't as necessary to tap CPA for that.
It may be that, the categories that I threw out there might not be relevant. You might have be able to make some other categories of programs that would be relevant to the types of programs that you have.
Yeah, just thinking off the cuff, I mean, the Respond Award that was part of the FY21 awards for CPA, that's specifically tailored for rental assistance for victims of domestic violence. So that is sort of a specific award for a certain segment of the population that I think is certainly worth noting. And other awards that come up like that, I think could certainly be included and noted.
Yeah.
Can I ask one other question?
Sure.
Down the bottom, Roberta, you've got CPA stories. I like the idea behind this, and I'd like to imagine that we could have some good stories that we could tell to the press, because quite frankly, the CPA and what we do at the CPC are some of the best kept secrets in Somerville. And quite frankly, people who paid money into the fund, as I do as a property owner, would like to see and know that this money is being spent according to what was meant to be spent on. And by taking these stories and making them into some sort of news release for a public relations exercise, is this the intent? Because I think that would be a good intent to have, to make sure that the people know exactly what we're doing and why this is important, and success stories.
Yeah.
Is that your intent?
That is the intent, and I think that it has been, these stories have been collected in the past, and I'm not sure how they've been shared, aside from being included in our report, which may be hard to find the way it's been filed on the web in the past. So we can try to draw those stories out and find ways of sharing them more broadly. In fact, that brings to mind that our March meeting will be our public hearing, and we'll be looking for some invited testimony and thinking about maybe trying to find one or two beneficiaries of the programs who might be willing to talk about the impact that it's had for them. So I wonder whether you all might be able to connect us with. So I was brainstorming earlier with Heather and Rose about what the public hearing might look like, and we were thinking of perhaps inviting the SCC to come and provide some testimony as one of the program providers, and then looking for beneficiaries to come and talk and speak about the impact that the programs have had on them, or the development project has had for them.
And I think it's as affordable as what that does is it talks to the rich mosaic of culture that we have here in Somerville. And it's a topic that's everybody's fully aware of at present in the city. So I think affordable housing is something of primary importance here, highly visible.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Roberta. I'm happy to chat more, offline as we close for the public hearing. I can certainly be a conduit to providers or SCC and get the ball rolling once that approaches.
Great, thank you.
You also might want to look, we may all want to look at what the Historic Preservation Commission does, because I think they do a pretty good job of highlighting, the awards that they give out and the projects, and the houses that are restored. Now they didn't fund the work generally, although maybe there was CPC money actually, or CPA money that funded the work. But then they, write, there's usually a series of columns, in the paper about, the projects.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you. We do in historic preservation, because Paul and Michael, I'm the representative from the historic preservation. But we also do some joint projects like the Broadway House, for instance, which was part affordable housing and part historic preservation. And I think these are things of real interest because it shows that we're collaborating as a team to try and solve a functional problem within the city and enrich the city in itself.
The Waterworks development, if I'm not mistaken, falls into that category too.
Yeah, another one. Perfect. Yeah, on 16. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, so save the date, the 4th,
March 23rd.
March 23rd, and it would be really great to kind of to let people know kind of how this, in essence, partnership has really worked well for Somerville and for affordable housing, as well as we'll address the other parts of CPA, but it'd be great to have your support in that meeting.
Absolutely.
All right. Is there anything else we'd like to touch on this topic? We've got a couple other things on our agenda for this evening. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you again
thank you
for coming this evening.
Yeah,
You're
thank
welcome
you.
to
And
stay, of course, but
I gotta get dinner on the stove, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
just thanks everyone for being flexible. I know I had to postpone and then postpone again and reschedule to come tonight. So I appreciate you being so flexible, and it was a pleasure to be here. So thanks
it
for having
worked out well for us,
Great.
I think.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Great.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you all.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So do we need to vote on the template? Or is that not something we vote on? That's something we sort of discuss and give you input on and
I think it's sufficient to discuss and give input, although you're the committee, so.
I don't think we need to vote on that. I think that we've provided you input. Does,
I don't believe we do, Heather. We're just reviewing it.
okay.
All right. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the survey to use in our for our public engagement. I envision that the survey will be live for the months of February and March. So I will need to, so one of the things that I'd like to do is to have the survey, or at least a portion of the survey, be translated into all of the different languages that we can have translated. And we're asked to give 3 weeks for a translation request. So one of the questions that I have is whether it's preferable to launch the survey in February since it will be ready, or if we prefer to hold off and launch it in all languages at once toward probably toward the end of February.
I would recommend that you hold off until you have it in all the languages.
I agree.
Yeah, what languages are you looking at?
The languages that the city translates in are Spanish, Portuguese,
Haitian Creole, I think generally.
Haitian Creole, and I think Nepal.
Nepali, really?
Yeah. So yeah, so I can make the request tomorrow, as you know, once we have the committee's agreement on the content of the survey, and then launch it multilingually all at once as soon as it becomes available. So with that, I shared with the committee in your meeting packet the suggested 2020 survey. So I began, I'll share this document while we talk about it. The first page is just a review of what is in the prior year survey. Just these 6 questions that are in the survey. Basically, it's asking, are you aware of the Community Preservation Act? Where did you hear about it? Based on your understanding, which of the following could the CPA fund? And then list any projects that you know of that have been funded by CPA. Then if you had $100, how would you allocate it between the program areas? And please share comments about any specific improvements you'd like to see in your neighborhood. So what I'm suggesting is to expand the survey a bit. First of all, ask people some demographic questions to give us a better idea of how representative the survey respondents are to the city. So the first question is, which ward do you live in? And then I skip and put the rest of the demographic questions at the end of the survey because it's less crucial to answer them in case we lose people who drop off before they get to the end. So first, which ward do you live in? And then I repeat the question regarding if you had $100, how would you allocate it between the program areas? And then I ask 3 open-ended questions, one for each program area. Are there any specific projects that you would like to see CPA be used for for open space, recreation, historic preservation, and then just share any comments that you have regarding affordable housing needs. And then the second section of the survey is CPA awareness. Are you aware of any of the following projects? And then I list, not comprehensive list, but a list of the major projects that people may be more familiar with. How did you learn about these projects? Is there a specific project that you're particularly supportive of? And share any comments or concerns related to the Somerville CPA program. And then the last page is optional demographic questions, asking, just some general questions about age, whether members of the household are children, seniors, people with disabilities, whether people are renters or owners, and get a sense of the household income, and race and ethnicity. And then finally asking if they wish to be added to the newsletter, they can enter their email, or we'll provide a link that they can sign up for so that their survey response can remain anonymous if they choose. So with that, I wanted to see if you have any questions or comments or concerns. Shahan?
Yes, hi Roberta. Thank you so much for sharing this survey. I was wondering regarding the ward, if this survey is being administered online, is it possible to include a link or something that could allow the survey respondents to look up their ward? I just think that might be helpful.
Yes, I can do that for the online. I've already actually formatted a paper version, and I'm at 3 pages without a map. So my question would be whether we want to, if we wanted to add a map to the paper version, that would be 4 pages. That's still 2 sheets of paper. So
You could have if you do want to do that and add a map, I'm not necessarily advocating it, but it could just be on the final, you could have it at the end. So that if you don't need it, so it could be a page, the back of the 4th page, the back of the 2nd page if it's printed 2 sides.
Yeah. And I may even actually be able to, it's probably best to keep it simple, just a map of wards. That's.
Yeah. No.
I think that might be very helpful.
I agree.
One small note is in question 2, you say, how do you allocate it among the 3 categories? But then you have 4 options.
Yes. If I can get back to it, there we go. The 4th option is flexible funding. So
Maybe
each of the 3
you just say these 4 either. If you want to keep 4, at least you should say 4 in the question.
Okay, yeah, so I could add something, something like that. I'll wordsmith it some more. But
I think it could be simple enough to just say, if you had $100, how would you allocate it among 4 potential categories of CPA funding?
But we do want to make sure that people know, they may not know that each of the 3 categories must have a minimum of $10.
Oh, yeah. Well, then but you still have that. You have that in the second half. So.
Right.
So I think that still works.
Yeah.
I think flexible funding is a problematic thing to throw at people as well as a question if they don't know, because they might say, well, is this sort of a slush fund where people can just sort of allocate money for ice cream?
Yeah.
What if you just call it reserve funding? I don't know if it has a formal name, but.
Yeah. Or reserve contingencies or something like that. But flexible is too, to me, it's problematic.
Well, it's a
The
funny
word.
category, like, because this is emergency funds as well as administrative funds, right? I mean, this is sort of,
No, the administrative funds actually,
Separate.
yeah, that would be
from that.
separate. Yeah. It's so actually, so
I mean, you could
I'm
keep it simple. You
continuing to
could
use
just,
the question that has been used in the past, but we don't have to ask people to divide $100. So that's how we've done it before. In other communities, I've used the question that would be along the lines of, what is your highest priority between the 3 program areas? And allow them to select high, medium, or low between each of those 3 program areas.
well,
Um,
how do we use this information?
so when we prepare the plan update, the CPC will decide on the proportion of the budget that is going to go to each of those 4 categories each year. So I think in the last year, decided that 50% was going to go to affordable housing, something like 30% or 25, something like 30% went to open space and recreation, and then maybe 20% went to historic preservation and 15% to flexible funding. Those numbers don't add up right. Something along those lines. But
What-
you specify the percentage that was going to go to each of those areas based on input that you received through this process and cumulatively over the years that CPC has been developing its plan, the input that you've seen over time.
What,
Go ahead.
what if we just simply ask people to rank these 4 categories 1 through 4?
They could be,
Yeah,
they
I
could
think
want
that
it to
would
be
be better.
even between them as well. So it doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
so by having 3 categories, affordable housing, open space, recreation, and historic preservation, allowing people to
Yeah.
check high, medium, or low for each of those 3 categories, that might provide you with, be a simpler way to ask the question that would provide you with equally valuable results.
Yeah, trying to get a pie chart during the survey has always been a little difficult, trying to get people to give percentages, which we then like average or something like that. And I mean, the difficulties have been several. The other one's been that we haven't had as much participation in recent years to have confidence in this input. So that's the other side of it. So I would suggest that I think the idea that we wait until we have all the translations is great, but I think we also have to have a deadline in case you just don't get all of the translations back at the same time. And I think it should be launched by the February meeting so that we can be talking about it or linking it, that it can be out there for at least a month before we're closing the survey.
Heather, if I may, I think there's a fundamental issue, and Roberta, I like what you've done, but let me be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. If I go right to the very beginning, prior years surveys, are you aware of the Community Preservation Act? What happens if somebody says no? The next question is, where did you hear about it? Well, I haven't heard about it. So there's no branch from that. Based on your understanding of it, which of the following could the CPA fund? Once again, that's sort of missing out on it. And then list any projects. So it would be easier to say, are you aware of any projects? But I think when you come back to this, are you aware of the Community Preservation Act? If somebody says no, and I think a lot of people will say no, where do we go from there with the survey? I think we need to have a branch, because further down on the second page, you've come out with some other thoughts that talk about it. And one of them would be, if you had $100 to allocate amongst different categories for funding under the Community Preservation Act, and these were the 3 categories, how would you rank them? Getting back to how David put it. So I think that fundamentally the idea of the survey is great, but how do we get it so it yields usable, really usable fruit to us?
Actually, I have a couple of responses. Oh, first of all, the first page that is prior year surveys, I'm not using that. So the second and third page that you have are what I'm planning to use this year.
Okay.
But secondly, what you've just brought up brings to mind the possibility that maybe we start with the CPA awareness questions, so that it gets people thinking about what CPA is before we ask them to tell us anything about it.
I like
I
that.
think that's important.
Yeah, I like
And then
that.
the second thing I wanted to point out is that I'm working right now on developing a poster that could be hung next to places where paper surveys can be collected. So I'm thinking of having paper surveys be available at the library branches, City Hall and the City Hall Annex, the Senior Center, and I would take suggestions for any other places where you think that people would be willing to have us put this information. So I would have a tabloid size poster, and that poster can have a little, just mostly visual facts about CPA. So it can say CPA is a program that funds, that provides local funds for these types of projects, approximately $3 million a year. And then show examples. I have picked out 8 examples of CPA projects that we funded in the past, representing each of the program areas. And so provide pictures of those 8 examples. And then at the bottom say the committee decides every year how to spend the money, and they're looking for your input on goals, and then provide a link to the public hearing and explain that this survey is used to help the committee share its goals. So I could prepare, I hadn't thought about it, but it's absolutely just as necessary to prepare something that could be viewed online by people who take the survey online, who don't. I was thinking that a lot of those people would have access to other CPA information already, but they may not. So I could have that poster perhaps also be converted into something that they can view online before filling out the survey.
In different languages.
Yes. And that's why the survey is mostly visual, very like it'll have maybe 3 or 4 sentences total, and the rest is going to be images. So it won't rely on language to share the message.
And that's why I think the idea of starting with that list of CPA funded projects is really great, because it educates people actually about the impact that we've had. Because they'll go through that list, they'll know these places and not realize that actually all of them were CPA funded. But that sort of, it sort of primes the well about, wow, all of these things were CPA funded at the
Raises
onset.
awareness too.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, when you put these out, you talked about senior centers and City Hall and so on, also put them out at the different, there's 3 major places. There's the, what's it called? The place down on near the park, near Broadway. There's the Grace Baptist, Grace Church. There's the church up on Broadway, up on Spring Hill, near the Magoon House, where we've got a high percentage of people who don't have English as a first language. And when we put out these questionnaires, if they're in the language, then we'll get good feedback from a better cross-section of the population as well. So I'm just thinking, add those into the equation too, if you could, Roberta.
Okay.
Just a thought.
Yep.
And we had also discussed asking recipients to share it with their constituencies through their communication channels so that, you know, leverage that goodwill. That's
Yeah, and
actually
the,
in their grant language that they are supposed to do things like that. So
Is anybody concerned about the length of it? 3 pages and not people not having enough attention span to get all the way through, or just me?
how much we're interested in the demographics.
Yeah, I
when
guess
it
that's what it
when it-
comes down to, because the first 2 pages, we wouldn't cut more, but I don't know, the 3rd page worries me.
The demographics, I mean, it's possible to ask fewer questions, but it is really critical to ask demographic questions because otherwise, it's important for us to see how representative the sample is that we're collecting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we don't know whose voices we're hearing speak to us. We can assume that we're getting a cross section when in fact we're only getting, you know, people of one income level and one race who live in one ward of the city. So that's what we want to know. It may be that we only get people who answer the survey who are of one income level, one race, and one ward. But if that's the case, we want to know that so that we can take that into consideration when we interpret the results of the survey.
Well, then would you consider putting in a question answer or an option that would be rather not answer to the one that would be, for instance, income or ethnicity?
The whole
I-
category is labeled
Yes,
optional.
yeah, so it does say it's option, like these questions will be optional at
But
the
of
top
course,
of the section.
and of course, all the questions are optional, but I think that's still a good distinction.
Yeah. And I can put a rather not say to the
Well-
income and the race questions if you.
Well, when in fact you could even do that, I mean, because then people can, rather than think of all of the questions as optional or not, is people can pick and choose the ones that they're comfortable sharing.
Okay.
But going back to Alan's original point and the discussion about reordering the questions, I think that's a really good and I would probably really start with the awareness one. I would take out the heading though, because I think in my mind it all merges together, and so you kind of go, you start with 6 and then 7 and then 8, and then between 8 and 9, put your question 2, which is, now you've thought of all these projects, we've kind of primed this pump about what do you like, what do you support, and if you had $100, how do you divide it? So to me that kind of has a nice flow, and again, and you don't have to have heard of the CPA to be able to answer these questions.
Mhm.
All you need to know is, do you know what affordable housing, open space, and historic preservation are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we come back to these questions, what are right now the questions 2 through 5. First of all, questions 3, 4, and 5. It says, are there any specific open space recreation projects that you would like to see CPA funds used for? Would you suggest taking out the CPA funds and just say, are there any specific recreation and open space projects that you would like to see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the only funding we can control is the CPA funding, but we don't need them to phrase it that way.
Right. Yeah.
I also wonder if you just drop the flexible funding category from up above and you just keep it
I
A,
wanted
B,
to
and
come back
C.
to I wanted to come back to this. Do we want to keep the dividing $100 or do we want to simplify it and make it high priority, medium priority, low priority?
I thought you made a good case about people wanting to be able to say, I want to, I want every category to get $25. And that's awkward to do in another way. And by the same token, I think I would keep D or some form of D for the same reason, but I would prefer it to be some, maybe not flexible so much as emergency or some other, kind of, way of, that we reserve money for contingency.
Emergency reserve.
I don't know what an emergency, I don't know what a CPA emergency is, but yeah.
Discretionary?
Discretionary sounds,
No.
it sounds, yeah.
That's ice cream again.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust me with discretionary money.
Any of the above.
Dark web money.
But
I mean,
but we did use some of that money. You remember on the project, one of the projects we funded.
Yeah.
So it does come up, that we didn't have enough, and then we had the money, that was kind of in reserve. Maybe just call it reserve funding. Where someone can say, yeah, it makes sense for you guys to kind of have a, a reserve fund, for when things come up. And I'm okay. I mean, people can put zero, in that column.
Yeah,
they don't
and
have to
reserve
allocate.
may be better than undesignated. Undesignated might
Yeah,
also
I
sound-
like reserve better than undesignated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Undesignated. Yeah.
I think though, if you leave the flexible funding, it should say 4 categories, not 3. And then I'll play devil's advocate for a moment and say that there could be the case to take flexible funding out is that I think when this was written, you must have been thinking, I know the way we've talked about this question in the past, we want to know what our constituents think about what those 3, how they would prioritize the 3 main categories, right? And so, if you leave you have to change it to 4 or take it out because you ask about 3, is what I think. And if you leave it at 3 and don't put flexible funding in, then there's a sense of what people's priorities are with those main categories. And so it's simpler. It's simpler is what it is. We as the committee know there has to be a flexible funding category and we're going to put money in there. And then after that, how it gets broken down.
We know that, Laura, but the person who's doing the survey, who's answering the survey, has to have a pretty crystal clear idea of what that really means. And so if you use like reserve or something like that, a word that they can grasp rather than just flexible, that's not good enough. We need to have something that is a concept people can grasp. They can grab affordable, open space, recreation, historic preservation, and then there's that contingency to add in for any one of the other 3 categories. How do we express that in a word or a phrase?
Well, I mean, any of those could work. And
Flexible doesn't work.
You have to change it to 4, though, is what the first person who spoke to this said that, and I think that's true. You have to change it to 4 categories then, because you're listing 4 things. It's confusing.
So I've tried this. I'm changing it to any of the above. So it's still 3 categories, but the last choice is any of the above.
Instead of flexible funding?
Which is kind of like not allocating at all, right?
I think that will confuse people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I still like reserve. I still like reserve funding. I still like the 4 categories. I still like the reserve fund being there, and I not least of which because then you can divide 100 by 4. Where dividing it by 3 gets awkward.
I will say, hi, sorry, Tatiana here. I will say from like explaining things at farmers markets, because I did do that, you can't, people understood better when I said there are 4 categories, or there are 4 pots to put the money in. When you say there are 3 categories, but then we also have discretionary funding, it's just people do find that, at least verbally, when I was describing things, maybe it's easier when you can just read it all out, but they did find that confusing.
Yeah. Why don't you say the following categories for CPA funding? Why does it have to be a number? These are the categories.
Well, and then also below that, just take out each of the three, just say each of the categories must have a minimum of 10.
Well,
Well,
each
no,
of
I
the
like
three
that. Only
categories.
the first three have to have a minimum of 10. I think that's
You
fine.
can just say, yeah, you could just say affordable housing, historic preservation, and open space recreation must each have at least 10% in there. And then I guess you can say but then we'd have to explain you don't have to have flex funding. I don't know. Making it concise and coherent is tricky.
Yeah, I don't know that you need the following that last sentence. I think it's. I think the shorter question.
Yeah.
Is just more concise and less to read.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you had $100, how would you allocate it amongst the following categories?
Yeah.
Affordable,
And
open
then,
space, historically.
right. The three primary, which is good because you're calling them primary,
Yeah.
have to have at least 10. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Maybe
Less is more.
balance. Okay.
Right.
All right. So I think we've covered these four questions. I don't know if you have any more input on the questions on the second page.
Now, are you going to reorder them in the way we've discussed?
Yes, I'll move these three questions ahead of the questions from the first section.
Yeah, and I
gonna
think you can
take
do
out
away with
section.
the category then. I don't
What's
know.
that?
Well, I don't know. The CPA awareness, the distinctions between page 1 and page 2 to me is academic.
I'll take away the headings, but I'll reorder the questions so that 6, 7, and 8,
Proceed 2, 3, and 4.
2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
then I can keep or eliminate question 9. Question 9 is just general. Do you have any other comments or questions related to Somerville CPA?
I would say delete it.
Okay.
My feeling.
If you're worried that the survey is long.
Yeah, I would consider deleting 8 as well. Is there something? Do we need 8? I mean,
I suppose we don't. Yeah.
I don't want to overstep,
Yep.
but I'm not sure, because we're asking them how you'd want to allocate them, money in the future. I'm not sure if we want them to tell us what they liked or didn't like that much about what we did in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile keeping it in, David, because somebody might have a huge vested interest, say, in the West Branch Library. So they turn around and say, well, I'd like to allocate 75% to historic preservation to make sure libraries get preserved.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm particularly, so this could offer us a skewing counter to it.
But they could also say, I want 90% of the money, 90% of my $100 to go to historic preservation. But that's fine. That doesn't make or break it in my mind.
I'll add.
But I agree with you. I don't think we need 9.
I'll add the question, why are they supportive of that project? Because I recall that you all suggested that I add the question why to a previous survey that we did regarding the when we asked for public input about the FY22 applications. I added the question why, and that gave us some really interesting answers. So I'll add the question why here as well.
Yeah. In 7, and I think I don't know if there was another one too. You might want to add something like, a friend or colleague.
Ah,
Option as
okay.
to where you heard about
I
things,
could
or
say
some
word of
other,
mouth.
some other word of mouth, some other sort of generic. I didn't hear about it from any of these things. I just heard about it.
Yeah. Okay. And then we could look at the demographic questions. These are standard demographic questions that I've used across a lot of surveys in the past.
How good is the response rate to those questions?
Usually, for the most part, we get answers to them.
Yeah, okay. I think it's fine. I think they're fine. Like I said, like we discussed briefly, if you want to add some, I prefer not to say. I don't know if you want to do it to all of them or not. If there are ones you think, often where I see that is on the race questions and on the income question.
Yeah.
But people
And
may
on
not
the
want to
income
talk about their children either. I don't know.
Also, I don't see this here, but if you have gender, then generally that I see an option to not discuss one's gender as well.
We don't care about their gender.
I often expect that when people fill out a survey like for this purpose, that the survey is representing a household. So I often don't ask about gender.
Yeah.
Well,
Gender's
right.
not relevant, I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Well, thank you so much for your input. I don't want to cut off if you have any further questions or comments about it. Great.
No, I think it's in good shape with those changes. I'm excited to get it translated and see what we hear.
No, we talked briefly about whether we would wait, putting it out versus waiting for translation, all the translations. And I don't know if that was resolved because Heather, I think you were expressing a kind of a maybe reluctance to wait for all the translations.
I've
been involved in projects where one or two, like one translation may be very late, trailing behind the other ones or something. And I just think that in order to give Roberta some guidance before the next meeting, that if we feel that it's important that it's sort of live by a certain date, that the first tier is let's have all the translations, but then the second tier is but let's get it posted by a certain date.
I think that
I've got every confidence that Roberta can get it done in the time frame.
If I send this out tomorrow, then I will be giving them the time that they requested and be able to have it posted by the 17th. So I could make it go live. Yeah. I'll hold them to their timeline that they've promised. And if we can get it out sooner, we will. But I'll make the 17th be the day that I'll make it live for everyone. All right, then the next thing that I wanted to talk about, actually, while we're on the subject of the annual review, maybe I can bring up the calendar. I was going to talk about that under other business, but I think it's relevant to cover now. So let me open the calendar. So we've already talked about the public hearing being held in March. Originally, the calendar that we talked about last month showed the public hearing being in February. And Heather and Rose and I came to the conclusion that March would be a preferable date for a number of reasons. For one thing, it gives us much more time for publicity to do outreach to invite people to the hearing. And it also gives us some more time to invite public testimony. Invited testimony for the hearing. So we had some ideas of invited testimony to bring to the hearing that could include inviting PSUF to talk about the parks projects, and the Somerville Community Coalition to talk about housing projects. And for historic preservation, I was looking at the kinds of projects that we've funded in the past, and I thought it would be really interesting to have a focus on accessibility in historic preservation projects. And so I was going to invite Somerville resident Josh Safdie, who is a handicap accessibility consultant in his day job, to come and talk about the importance of handicap accessibility and the opportunity that CPA provides to be able to fill that need. And then we could also have some testimonials from other users. So the one that I was thinking of was Peabody House, to talk about the range of projects that they've been able to carry out with CPA funds, and what they anticipate being the range of projects that they need, since they're, I think, not as far along as the Somerville Hispanic Association in terms of executing the range of historic preservation that their building is in need of. And we could also perhaps invite the Somerville Hispanic Association to come and talk about the programs that are housed in their building and the people who are benefiting from the improvements that have been made on their building with CPA funds. As well as I mentioned earlier, to invite somebody who's benefiting from affordable housing programs, to give their story. So that was what we had in mind, but I wanted to invite committee members to share any other thoughts or ideas that you have for invited testimony, and for ways that we can bring the public to come and attend the hearing and share their thoughts in the hearing. And if you have no comments, I'll be happy to go ahead and work with this list. I will go back to the calendar then, and just go over once more what we anticipate reviewing in the next few months. So in February, I have on deck the draft application instructions, forms, and evaluation criteria, all of which I provided in the meeting packet for this evening's meeting, not expecting that you would have time to read all of it. That's about 30 pages of material, and could perhaps you want to have some time to really absorb what is contained in those 30 pages before discussing it. So we would discuss that at our next meeting in February, and perhaps a few other things that we might add to the agenda, although I want to be sensitive to not make it too long of an agenda. It would be helpful to have a presentation by PSUF, similar to what we've just had with the Affordable Housing Trust, to kind of get an update on all of the projects that have been funded in the past. Although we'll be asking them to come in March to talk about what they anticipate the needs to be, and how they've gone about identifying what the needs are. So we could spend some time in February just reviewing project updates in general for all of the projects that are still ongoing and including in that having PSUF come and speak to the updates on their prior projects. And what I have not included on this, but I think we need to add, well, actually I have on this menu, on this calendar, the LHD small grant program, which we weren't able to finalize for tonight's meeting, but I would want to move that and have it ready for the February meeting. We're so close to having the guidelines prepared and ready to launch, but they do need to be reviewed and approved by the CPC before we can launch them. So hopefully we'll be ready for that in February as well. And then, so that's the February meeting. March is the public hearing. And in April, then we would have, so according to the schedule, the Affordable Housing Trust will deliver its spring report, which should be helpful for us in preparing our annual plan update. We can use that information in our plan update. But I have a question of whether you want to ask the Affordable Housing Trust to actually present their report in April, so soon after you've just had them come and talk to you now. Maybe that will be good timing. Or if you'd want to have them come and give a presentation maybe later in June when we have more time on the agenda. Then reviewing the results of our public hearing and the survey would take place in April. And then we can review a draft of the program areas section showing what the accomplishments, goals, and priorities are for each of the program areas for our plan update. And then in May, we would discuss the financial section of the plan update and the annual CPA budget, which we need to approve and recommend to City Council could be a part of that financial report review. And then we also, at that point in May, want to just present and finalize the entire plan update and application instructions so that we can launch them to invite people to begin the application process. So that's just a review of our calendar for the next few months. We can, I think, maybe make decisions later whether we have too much on the agenda for the later months. I'm not sure how we can shrink February because that looks like it's going to be a long meeting, and I think everything is important to cover at that time.
Roberta, can you remind me in February, was that the month at the public hearing?
We're moving the public hearing to March.
The March. Well, what's the scope of that public hearing again? Because it's not a public hearing on proposals, right? Because we haven't.
So the CPC every year holds a public hearing that is to provide input in your planning process so that it goes along with the survey. And the purpose is to help the committee to evaluate the community needs with respect to the CPA program areas.
Okay. And so that, along with this survey, is presumably what helps the commission direct its allocations.
Yes, and in addition to that, we will be having. I have a date. Yes, on March. Sorry, I keep bringing it up and closing it again. March 19, we will be tabling at the winter market at the Armory. So similar to the tabling events that we had in the fall, we'll be setting up a table and inviting people to provide input again. So I think in February meeting, I'll be asking for 1 or 2 volunteers to help with that event. I would also recommend and urge those of you, especially those who are members of other committees, go to your committees and invite them to have a discussion about what the CPA needs are, so that you can report that back to the whole committee or report back to me, and I can reflect your input from your committees in the draft of the program area section. So that's yet another way that we can invite their participation in providing input in our plan. Any other comments about the public engagement or the plan process or the schedule for the next few months?
It did seem to me that the PSEF and affordable housing presentations could both move later, because especially with the Affordable Housing Trust folks, we're asking them to, we just met with them tonight, we're asking them to come to the March meeting.
Yeah.
And then you have the April meeting. It just, I know the reports do, but
We may be able to just have them submit the report and then come and give a presentation in June after we've launched.
And should PSEF be in June too?
Sure. So that means in February, we would probably have historic preservation staff come to discuss the small grant program. But we'll move PSUF to June, and then I can just go over what the project updates are without asking them to speak on them.
That sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. All right.
I would just say that we should all think, I don't know, creatively or something about getting public input at the hearing in March, because I think I find that it is, to get people to come to attend something like that is hard, period. And I think one of the things that makes it even a little tougher is it's just it's a little bit 2 steps removed to sort of show what the benefit of CPA is, the CPC is rather, and just, you know, these funds are there and these funds actually belong to everybody. And it's a tough sell to get people to commit to come to a meeting on whenever it is, March 23rd, the public hearing. You know, you're asking people to carve out a chunk of time, and that's just tough without knowing that there's a benefit there. And so I think that having been on this committee for 3 years now, I can really see that it's a little bit hard to pitch it as a benefit just to the average person who lives here in Somerville, but it really is, you know. And so I think we all have to work at that. And so I'm glad that there's tabling happening right before that, but post on Facebook, you know, whatever other community groups that we all are part of. For me, it's, you know, it's school related. I have 2 kids at 2 schools.
What if we add a question to the survey? You know, do you know that there's a public hearing on March 23rd? You know, please come.
The hearing will be publicized everywhere that the survey is publicized.
Could the hearing be covered by the cable channel?
Oh, that's a great idea. It can and it should.
Well, is the hearing, I assume it's going to be a remote hearing, right? So it'll be a Zoom hearing or whatever, but this, whatever this is called that we're in now.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, right? It's not an in-person hearing.
Correct.
Correct, yeah.
So So people can do that, but maybe it could also be either covered by the cable scat or just like live streamed on, YouTube or something. Then we'll know exactly how few people are watching.
Would you like me to move on to the draft signs? Great. So there is not a lot to report on this at the moment, but your input kind of at the front end is always very helpful. So I am working on 2 types of signs. That is temporary signs and permanent signs. The temporary signs are for projects that are under construction right now. What we'd be envisioning is just lawn signs that can be stuck in any property where the project is in progress right now. And then the permanent signs would be installed. I'm just trying to open the document while I'm speaking. The permanent signs would be installed on any property that has had CPA funds invested for any type of program. And what I'm hoping to do is to have a universal sign template that would be used for every type of project, for every property that has had CPA funds. So this template could be available for the, actually, why don't I talk first about the lawn signs? I'll share this. This is a rough draft of a possible lawn sign that was prepared by one of the companies who I spoke with about getting an estimate. So I would want to change the, at a minimum, change the font and add the word Somerville Community Preservation Act to the end of this. So there are some edits that I'd want to make, but just in concept, this is potentially what a lawn sign might look like. So I wanted to ask for your feedback on this, if you have any preferences or how you would like the message to be laid out or worded. I'm sorry, yeah, I've shared it. You can see this?
Yeah.
It seems great to me. I agree, Roberta, that it would be good to have ACT in there. And I feel like it would be good, I don't know if this is on there, but a website where people can go to learn more about, CPA at ...
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It'd be good to have the website.
Okay.
But and at the bottom, do you want to? I mean, you think it would be Community Preservation Act at the bottom, or commission? I mean, are these kind of sponsored by the commission? So it's Community Act in the little square to the left, and it's CPA. But are these?
I think it's the ACT.
Is it the commission putting up the signs?
The commission is making the decision, but the ACT is providing the funding.
Of course. But I'm wondering if some of this is also the commission taking credit for, the work implementing, the act.
It is a kind of a funny thing that we get into when we try to talk about ourselves as a committee and the act. Like sometimes I'm not quite sure which one to use, it's like, so I appreciate the question, because I think that there is a time when commission is appropriate and times when act is appropriate, but I'm not entirely clear when.
I feel like we get like the commission, the committee gets a lot of, we get the kudos when there are openings of the library, of affordable housing projects, stuff like that. But I think typically the lawn signs are their CPA signs, not CPC signs.
Okay.
Yeah, it's money. It's the money that they're putting into the because of the CPA Act. It's not our money. It's the money that's coming from the Act.
Right.
It's, yeah, act, not commission.
I'm going to share the permanent sign now. So my vision for the permanent sign is to create something that's small enough that it could be seen, we could install it everywhere across the city and we won't get tired of looking at it. Because that's our goal. And so I'm thinking of something maybe roughly 4 inches by 7 inches. That could be in a couple of different materials. For historic buildings, engraved bronze is going to be the most appropriate material. And there may be some other installations for which engraved bronze might be most appropriate. But otherwise, it could be installed on chain link fences, on buildings, on concrete structures, or existing signposts, for example. And these could be, I'm still kind of trying to get input on what materials would be optimal for this. I've spoken with people who've given me some options of printed aluminum or engraved aluminum, engraved plastic that's printed on the back side, and like a laminate that's clear printed on the back side. There have been lots of different options shown to me. And in fact, I'm going to be meeting with city staff to get their input on what's preferable. But before I do that, I figured it would just be helpful to run past the committee what you feel about this concept. And if you have any strong feelings about size or materials or anything like this.
Well, the very first thing that I thought of is like the plaques that, again, the historic preservation, that are on the historic buildings, and they're small. I don't know how big they are. And I don't know what material they are. I mean, but those are what, the very first thing I thought of. It's something, I think they're small, they're discreet, they're classic.
Like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep. Aluminum.
But they're small, right? They're only, maybe they're 6 or 7 inch, and maybe, I don't know, maybe because I'm on the street, they look, I'm thinking of the little plaques that you see on.
It's about the size of a sheet of letter-sized paper.
They are that big? Okay,
Yeah.
the ones I was thinking of, I thought were smaller.
No.
So what if we did, I don't know if this is too shortened, if this is too minimal, but what if instead of what if we just had that square and then we had Somerville Community around each of the 4 sides? We had Somerville Community Preservation Act, and it was just that little, that square right there with those words added to it. And then it's not quite as much of a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have
the
2
same on the
versions
other
of this.
side. Yeah.
We have 2 versions of this logo. One version has the titles, and the other version doesn't. So.
Oh yeah.
I like that idea. I like that idea. I'm just doing the square.
And if you look back to the first one, the lawn sign, it's just Somerville Community Preservation.
Yeah, that's
So if you
great.
flip back to the other one, it's take out the word act. It's not necessary. Somerville Community Preservation.
Except we need something on the 4th side, right?
I thought the
Somerville
other one
City
did say act. Oh, can you go back to the other
Community
one?
Preservation.
I thought the other one did have act. It does have act.
Yeah.
On the
And this is
lower right.
this is our official logo. This is
Yeah.
on a lot of materials that we have.
Yeah, I like that. I would.
That's great.
I think that's
Right,
great.
Just use this.
Out of gold.
Yep.
I support that idea too, and it's sort of an interesting graphic. It's subtle, but it's like branding. So I like that idea too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay.
Would it be a requirement that that these signs be up on works in progress and afterwards?
Yeah.
Do we have the authority to do that?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's in our contracts, actually. They're already supposed to do this, and we probably have about a 50% success rate at getting these signs in place. So we're gonna go back and even though some locations already have the signs in place, like already have some accreditation of the CPA in place, I feel as though having this universal sign at each location will make it more visible. Because right now it's easy to miss. It's, it says Community Preservation Act as like part of a big bronze coin. It's like one of 20 words that's on the coin. And I would, prefer that this, you see this and you know that it's a CPA project anywhere you see it.
Yeah, it's reinforcement, constant reinforcement.
Yeah, no, I think those are nice.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. That makes it actually much easier because we don't have to design anything. We already have the design. But I can still I can still talk with them about talk with the staff about where they would be placed and what materials they'd be made out of, and what kinds of installations are most appropriate. So
Yeah. So is that a signage company who could give us mock-ups who could send to you mock-ups of all of that, the plaque in different materials?
so different signage companies that I've talked to have different versions of materials that they can do. So I don't think I can get one company to give me several different kinds, but I could purchase a mock-up from different companies and then decide between them.
Roberta, I just got several quotes for one of our PSUF projects for signage. So I have like a whole list of like 6 different signage vendors that I'm happy to share with you if that's helpful.
That would be wonderful. Yeah. Thanks. I know I got some from some folks in Somerville, and I've collected some names from others, but that would be helpful. So I just wanted to go back for a moment to the lawn sign and see whether you had any thoughts or suggestions for changes to what we would say here beyond what we've discussed already.
I think it's great as is with the website.
Okay,
Yeah,
adding the
I agree.
website. Like I'll put a QR
Yeah.
code.
Yeah, that would be great.
How big is that?
It's just standard lawn sign size. I think it's 18 by 24.
Okay.
So Roberta, can we do a QR code and do the website too?
We can. We don't have a conveniently short website, but it's not impossibly long either.
Okay. I still think a lot of people they don't do the QR code.
Okay. Yep.
People,
Got it.
I think people have gotten used to it though, with so many menus and stuff. If you've gone out to a restaurant or a bar,
I don't think that. I think seniors don't do it. I think it still is foreign for a lot of seniors, at least the ones that I work with.
but they're probably not going to write down and go to the website either.
But that might be true.
Okay.
Good stuff, Roberta.
Thank you. So that is my report on signs, and I think that brings us to other business on the agenda. Pulling up my notes on other business, we've talked about the calendar. You'll notice that on the calendar that you have in your folder, it shows the dates for the whole year for all of our CPA meetings throughout 2022. Then I wanted to give a status update on the Magoon House. At our previous meeting, the committee approved spending up to $15,000 for a building conditions assessment to be able to develop a scope for the Adams Magoon House application. And I'm working right now on developing an RFQ so that we can retain a consultant to be able to carry out that study. And finally, I wanted to update you all that the City Council took up, the Finance Committee of the City Council took up the FY22 funding recommendations at their meeting yesterday. And the projects were voted out of committee, so they're scheduled to be voted on tomorrow. So it may be that by Friday we can be able to make an announcement about the projects that were funded for this year. So given that, I've been working on a newsletter that I'll be sending out within the next week with information about the projects that we funded and inviting people to participate in the survey and the public hearing. Although I may want to just give them a heads up in this newsletter that those will be coming out, and to send a second newsletter following when the survey is actually live, since we're going to have a lag in between. So I think that covers everything that I wanted to talk about. Was there anything else that you can think of?
Well, it's something I haven't done yet, but I want to encourage everyone on the committee to do it, which is to link the Facebook page to whatever social media you use to help get it out there.
Yeah,
And promote it.
I will be doing more that I can do to push our Facebook page. I'm adding it to the newsletter, and I'm going to find look for other places where I can let people know that we have a Facebook page.
All right. Anything else that people want to touch on? I know that.
Do the meetings ever just go 1.5 hours?
Yeah. I know that I won't be here at the February meeting, unfortunately, so Rose will step into chairing that evening, and I leave it in your collective capable hands. But it will be back for the March meeting.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right. Should we have a motion to close the meeting? Or is there any other items to discuss? Yeah. Okay, so Alan's moved to close. Do we have a second?
A second.
And Rose a second. And all in favor, just raise your hand.
You're all tired.
Okay. Seeing no objection, meeting's closed. And next meeting is, it's right here on the agenda, the February 23rd, 6:30.
Thank you all. Stay well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, be well. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Great work, Roberta, as always.
Thank you. One day I'll get it down to a shorter presentation.
Okay.